Well, the purpose of a testimony is to exhort, the listeners and encourage them on in some way in the Lord. And I would like to, first of all, this morning, tell you what it is that it's my purpose to exhort you to. And that is to read the Bible, to really be a student of the Bible, to read the Bible, to get to know it. Not just because that's what we do. We have our devotions in the morning and, we come to church and listen to preaching and teaching about the Bible. But to really get to know it, kind of like the way some people know a favorite movie. They watched it 100 times before, but they still like watching it. They can tell you every next line. They know what's getting ready to happen, but they still enjoy watching it. And that's the way the Bible ought to be to us. Because, and this is what my testimony has to do with. A testimony is something that we've been through, that God has used to teach us something, or that maybe we learned something about how to walk with the Lord. And what I've been through recently is coming off the mission field. And, in a word, it's not easy. There's other people here in the congregation for various reasons that have come off the mission field, and they didn't have very encouraging news for me. When I first got back, like, don't worry, brother, in a month or two, you'll be over it. No, they didn't tell me anything like that. Okay, there was a different story. It's not easy. It's not just a job. It's not just an assignment. That a person could take another one that had better pay if the opportunity presented itself. It's your life. It's your whole life is wrapped up in it. You don't really have a plan B, or at least I didn't. To borrow a Mongolian saying, I've figured I was going to lay my bones in the Mongolian side. But here I am. Here I am in America, and you find yourself thinking, what am I doing here? Or what am I going to do here? And, life, we find ourselves sometimes in situations that we didn't anticipate being in. And we don't know how to go forward. We don't really see the way forward. And that's where knowing the Bible comes in. Okay, we all know the verse, the Bible is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Okay, and in times like that, the Bible will show the way forward. Because, I don't know your experience, young people, they haven't experienced much, but, things happen in life and you don't know how to go forward. All kinds of things are going to happen in life. I worked with a cowboy one time that as we were riding along, we were talking about wrecks that happened. And he said, he wasn't a creationist. He said, we're dumb animals riding dumber animals, working even dumber animals. Wrecks are bound to happen. Okay, so you might as well just know that when you get into the business because, don't be surprised when it happens. Okay, so we're sinners, living among sinners in a fallen, corrupt world. Okay, life isn't just going to be a cakewalk. Okay, there's going to be things that happen. And, it can get pretty bad. It can get pretty hard. Job, he's the example of these things. But Job, talking about his life, he says, I loathe it. I would not live always. Let me alone. Let me alone. For my days are vanity. You don't need a verse number. How long wilt thou not depart from me, nor let me alone? He says. Another place, just, the depths that Job was in kind of hit me in a way that they've never hit me before recently. Withdraw thine hand far from me, and let not thy dread make me afraid. Wherefore hidest thou thy face, and holdest me for thine enemy? Okay, so while the choir's up there singing, isn't it wonderful to be a Christian? Isn't it wonderful to be God's child? Job is thinking, just let me alone. Why have you made me your enemy? Okay, so, different things, thoughts come into our head when we reach a place where we don't know, we don't understand it, I'm speaking in a general sense. I understood my situation, but, when we don't know the way forward, all kinds of thoughts come into our head, and all kinds of thoughts concerning what am I going to do now? What are my options, or what do I want to do? What does my flesh want to do? To me, it's kind of like a bag of tricks. Every occupation has its bag of tricks. My mentor in horse training, before I ever came here to train for the ministry, he had a big bag of tricks. And I rode a horse, we named him Flipper, because this horse had learned a very bad habit. He'd be going along, and all of a sudden he'd stop and start backing up, and then just fall right over backwards. Sounds funny, but for the guy riding him, he'd ended up in the hospital. And since you're laughing, I want to tell you something. I believe if there's ever a time in my life when a guardian angel was right there, we didn't know the horse. First time I rode him, and he did that. And he did that 3 or 4 times during the time that we had him, and every time he went straight over backwards. The saddle horn poked right in the ground. That time when I was riding him, he went over sideways. I think a guardian angel was there and shoved him over to save me, from death. But anyway, so what do you do with a horse like that? He was really a nice horse, good looking, good breeding. But what do you do with a horse like that? Send him to the glue factory? People have spent money on him. Well, my mentor, Wes, he had a trick. I ended up riding that horse with another horse tied to his tail. And a slicker, a cowboy rain jacket in my hand. And when he started backing up, I just flipped that slicker in that other horse's face, and he'd run backwards. And then old Flipper would be digging his toes into the ground to try to keep from running back, to getting pulled backwards. A trick. I rode a mentally retarded horse. I don't know, what his actual mental state was, but he was different. Okay, he wasn't going to learn to give to the reins in a normal way. So I ended up riding that horse with a jacket tied over his head. He couldn't see anything. Wes had to run me out of the barn with a manure rake just to get him to move, But he learned, in his unorthodox way, that if he would give to the pull of reins, he wouldn't crash into something. So, all kinds of tricks there are to get through hard places, to deal with unorthodox situations. Okay, now the Holy Spirit is here. He said he's in us if we're saved, and he said that he would bring to remembrance the things that Jesus had told us. Okay, he would bring them to remembrance. And so that's why it's important for us from right now to read the Bible in order to get to know it. Have those things in your head so that the Holy Spirit can bring them to mind at the appropriate time. Okay? So if I understand right, that same thing happened to John Newton. When he finally reached the end of his rope, he said, "What is that verse my mom made me memorize?" What was that again? And it came to him. And he got saved. So we need to have the Bible examples in our mind. Okay? It may be your own fault that you find yourself in that difficult situation. Well, there's somebody that's gone before you that did the same thing. You could remember David. You could remember Peter. You could turn back there and say, well, what did they do? How did they go forward? It may be somebody else's fault that you're having a hard time in life. Okay? These kids that come in on the buses, I would guess a majority of them are in a situation like that, or, kids that I've been around. Well, Daniel, he was right with God, but his countrymen were departed from the Lord, and that was why he was taken captive into a foreign land. What did he do? Okay, how did he go forward? We can go back and read about it. It may seem inexplicable, why we're where we're at. Well, it seemed pretty inexplicable to Job. Okay, so he's your example that we can go back to and read again and ask God to help us to see the way forward. It may be a test. Okay, God does test us and try us. Well, Abraham was there. You could go back and read about Abraham. We may be suffering for righteousness' sake. Well, Jesus told us, you're blessed if you suffer for righteousness' sake because your reward is great in heaven. Okay, so the Bible shows us the way forward. And we got to remember that in our times of difficulty. And go to it. Go to it. Anybody that's been in the ministry has seen that unfortunately, most people, when they do mess up, when they do have trouble and get in an unorthodox situation, they go away. They're embarrassed to come in amongst God's people. They feel like, I don't belong there. They don't really want to read the Bible. Our flesh doesn't want to go to God. But the exact opposite is what we need to do. So, when you find yourself, I can't tell you the end of the story, okay? I mean, I know the path. I can't tell you how I finally broke through and got over all that, but I can tell you that I believe God is, instead of me taking off in some wrong direction, I'm in the way that God would have me to be in. And I would encourage you to make this, in reality, the lamp that lights your path.